Welcome on behalf of FLA. I will do the introductions, okay? And welcome to Pescara. Thank you, welcome, in front of this beautiful audience of young people and students. So, the first thing we agree on is that we can be informal, absolutely. The first thing I want to ask you is this. Well, first of all, have you found the studies you did on Dostoevsky in the performance we presented?
Yes, certainly. Because the great themes of the legend of the Grand Inquisitor appear very clearly and succinctly in such a way as not to get distracted, because the great theme of freedom, of which Jesus is the great defender, is the constant temptation of someone who wants to overpower the freedom with which we have been created, as we heard in the text. And so this is a very current theme because it seems to relate to the life of each of us, because a salvation that is not free would not be salvation.
Perfect. The theme of freedom. Clearly, here we open up. We make an absolute statement. Freedom. Freedom is a term that is used in an extremely broadly, even from a political point of view. Let's say it's a word that all ideological areas of the past, present, and future fill their mouths with. If we had to try to say what freedom is, according to you, could we say it at a universal level, or would everyone have their personal vision? Each person must start from their own experience, because it is the only way to see if then, starting from their own experience, we find ourselves recognizing the same concept of freedom.
Because if one does not start from experience, someone has the temptation to impose a concept of freedom, as, for example, the Grand Inquisitor does. For the Inquisitor, freedom is a very heavy thing to bear, as can often happen with people. This idea, of which the Inquisitor is like the emblem, is not far off. Why? Because sometimes it is easier to offload one's own responsibility, one's own freedom, onto another. How convenient. That's why there are sometimes so many people involved, because there is always someone who tells you not to worry. I will take care of your freedom. I will tell you what you want to do, what you must do, and thus you free yourself. There is always someone who tells you, after all, you cannot understand how things work. I will explain it to you.
So, in part, you have already answered the question I wanted to ask you now, which is, in your opinion, how much does culture affect the idea of freedom?
A lot. More powerfully, to the extent of a person's weakness of conscience, the less aware we are of who we are as a person. The desire for fullness we have, the desire for freedom to achieve this fullness we have, the more we can be subservient to the influence of any current inquisitor. So the problem is that we should not blame the inquisitor. The inquisitor has a power that is practically directly proportional to our weakness, to our lack of awareness. So when we allow ourselves to be subjected to any power, it is not because the power has this ability to subjugate us. It is because we have surrendered. We believed what the Inquisitor says because it is very well represented in the portrayal we have seen. We have been convinced to men that it was better for them to place their freedom in our hands. And we have convinced them. The problem is that power has this ability sometimes to charm in order to convince freely. It doesn't even require putting us in jail. We give it. We place our freedom in the hands of power. But this is not a problem of power. It is a problem for each of us if we have this passion for our freedom, and then we begin to see what experiences we have, what taste for freedom we have. And here we find the diversity of conceptions of freedom, because those who do not have this taste for freedom may decide to leave it in the hands of another, while those who have this taste will never submit, ever, to any dictatorship of any power.
Yes, as if to say that power tries to convince, but we allow ourselves to be convinced.
Perfect. So why? Because man, this is his greatness. This is his, let's say, irreducibility, has a capacity to be himself that does not depend on any power, right? So the question is how much we, growing in our personal and professional lives, in the journey we take, in our growth, are truly and deeply aware of what we desire, of what we need to live. Do we only need bread, or do we perhaps maybe need something more? Because this is what is truly at stake constantly. Because if one settles for anything, there is always someone who always makes it available to you, thus submitting you. Only when we grow in awareness of the fullness of the desire we have within will we be free from any inquisitor or any seller of conviction who is better left with our freedom in their hands.
I would say to pass the word to the kids.
Perfect.
A question.
For whom does Dostoevsky put Jesus on trial? What does Jesus have to do with man's rebellion?
In your opinion, why, after having seen the representation, because it is Dostoevsky who puts, it is not Dostoevsky, it is the Inquisitor who puts Jesus, right? The description he gives is of the Inquisitor who wants to put him in the stake because you have come back to ask, right? In your opinion, why does he take it out on Jesus?
But perhaps it is the fact that generally stubbornness does not please people.
Perfect. So, when one finds themselves in front of a free person, they do not like it when it comes to power. And if Jesus, the story goes, came and made us free, we said he came to give us freedom. But why did you come back? If we had already convinced everyone that it was better to be submissive, why did you come back before the time? And this is the great theme for us, because Jesus is the ally. As I describe him, he is the great ally of freedom. But this does not please the Inquisitor.
Another question from this area. Alessia.
So, a man is thirsty for freedom when he confronts another man, when life becomes an act of oppression. Otherwise, he feels empty. If no one acknowledges me, why is there emptiness?
In your opinion, why? No, because it is a dialogue. Right. In your opinion, because man feels the emptiness, unfillable, as the text said. Right.
Because if there is nothing attacks me, something makes me fall. I still have nothing.
I did not make an aggression, simply that man. This is our greatness, right? Did you feel it? Read Leopardi sometimes. If he had the whole world, the infinite universe, and felt that everything is little, small for the capacity of the soul to see the lack and the boredom, this, for Leopardi, is the most evident sign of the greatness of the human condition. So, freedom, the emptiness, the desire is not a consequence of anything. of oppression directly. It is the awareness that Leopardi had of the greatness of man. The more a person realizes who they are, the more they experience within themselves something, a greatness, and they say, but who am I? I have always loved Leopardi's expression. The mystery is the eternal mystery of our being, of what we are to desire so much. If you are so fragile, how is it possible that you feel so high? So, we are made this way because the one who made us to reach a fullness that all the others seriously cannot reach. And so, if one is aware of this greatness they perceive, something is always missing. In Italian literature, there are pieces and expressions of this that are spectacular, like that of Mario Luzzi. What is this lack, heart, that I feel inside me? But this lack that these great geniuses talk about is what a rapper like Mariah Carey feels. When she says, I fill the time, but not the emptiness. And this is the great question of our time. But what fills your heart? Any bread in the times of the Romans, bread in existence, historically correct. The circus was the way to distract from the true hunger and thirst for fullness. Now we can have other forms of circus, right? Other attractions, right? That seek to fill the unfillable void that Dostoevsky speaks of. And so it is a beautiful challenge for each of us who are here. But what fills this void? Because this void is the greatest sign of the greatness of what we are. Because if we didn't have this, we couldn't reach that little pine forest for which we are made.
Thank you very much. In this regard, I would like to say that Dostoevsky is indeed recited by the actor who plays the role of Jesus Christ. He says that he is afraid of this emptiness, if it is an emptiness of love.
Perfect.
So Dostoevsky somehow provides the answer within this matter. Let's return to the theme over here. Matteo.
Because Inquisitor is certain that people will obey him and set fire to the one who loves. It is merely a mysterious thing, isn't it? That the one who loved them, like Jesus, at a certain moment, the people submits and wants to get rid of him in the story of Jesus. The people who had acclaimed him, who had seen the miracles, who had seen all the good brought to history, at a certain point shouted, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" Because this is the great paradox. How is it possible that someone who brings us this fullness, this freedom that satisfies desire to make us truly free from any power, at a certain moment prefers, as the great Inquisitor says, to submit to power and condemn and want to get rid of, to put in the fire the one who answered this unbridgeable void. This is our great mystery, because each of us has the temptation to settle for bread and circuses instead of following someone who leads us to what we truly desire deep down.
Knowing what we need.
It is about freedom, because here lies the problem. For years, there has been a desire to impose the answer, as he says, for 15 centuries. And instead, what indeed strikes is that in Dostoevsky's representation, as he told it, the mystery sent his son, Jesus, and stripped him almost of his power, of his divine nature, to appear humble, as the text says, because he did not want to overwhelm man, the freedom of man. He wanted to attract him, to challenge him with attraction, with a beauty that could truly fascinate them. Like someone when they fall in love, who is not attracted to anything else but the attraction they have in front of them. The method with which Jesus acted in history is what we use when we feel the attraction of a person. The issue is that the only one who can truly fill this unfillable void is a presence that is so great that corresponds to this unfillable void.
Yes, there is another element that I personally found very interesting when I directed, which is this mechanism of demonstrating that being strong does not mean being tough, but means being simple, humble. These words from the novel are very beautiful. They struck me a lot. It says your strength is useless if you do not make it available to others.
Because strength is in self-awareness, not in the ability to be strong and impose oneself, because someone who needs strength to impose themselves is weak. Those who have the ability to fascinate do not need to impose themselves, only to be struck by that attraction that lies ahead. Therefore, they do not need strength. And this is what the entire Christian story also says about how much time it had to take to realize that, as recognized by Vatican II, truth is not imposed, but presented in order to allow oneself to be fascinated, which is what Jesus had seen. I stand before you stripped of any power, any coercion, any imposition, so that you can see if this corresponds to all the longing you have within you. This is a way of speaking about Christianity that is different from that of the inquisitors.
And this is also in line with the question that Manuel must ask, right?
So Jesus came to speak about the freedom of man, but the inquisitor accuses him that man needs bread. What does the need for bread have to do with the freedom of man?
Perfect. If we now understand what we said before, it is a matter of whether man has this unfillable void in which his own greatness consists. We are made. For an unfillable fullness, can bread satisfy?
Nice question, nice question.
But I say, bread. Everyone has the image they create of their own need, of their own bread. Because each of us, even Marrakesh, was dreaming that the day he took the great tour full of success, he would be satisfied. He is always struck by the post he uses at the end of this great tour, which says, I found myself. After this great success, with an unnatural silence and void, it is the most unexpected thing one could imagine. Because I always told my students, since I started being a professor, that the problem of life begins not when things don't happen as we expected, because this time I failed, but when it succeeds. The end of the world, and I said, no, the problem begins when one has great success and feels the void. So, what fills this void? Because when one has found in the open what they had in their mind that they could achieve, and they reach it, they find themselves, as my friend who painted said, and what she desired, the great exhibition. Finally, she was able to create the great exhibition with success beyond, like Marrakesh. And she spends the whole evening crying because it is not enough for her. If success is not enough, what is our greatness? If we do not understand this, we will always be at the mercy of any inquisitor and any bread.
So I take this opportunity. This is really off schedule. I don't see the kids, Lorenzo. Where are they? There they are down there. Listening to you, it reminds me of a time at the end of a show, one of the company members told me, "Fade, how strange, the show went really well, it was a success, but now I feel a melancholy inside that is incredible."
Very human.
Wait, and the beautiful thing is that one person said it and everyone else agreed. They were saying, yes, me too, so it's...
But this, in my opinion, is fundamental, because many times the problem is that if one does not understand oneself, I am interested in helping you understand yourselves, kids, because many times if you don't find an adult who at that moment tells you, look at this because this is your greatness. Otherwise, as a mother once said to her daughter who was talking to her, "Mom, I have everything I need, but I'm feeling a bit downhearted and melancholic." And indeed the mother replies, "My daughter, you would never be satisfied instead of celebrating because you felt all that inadequacy." The mother scolds her gently yet firmly. But if when you find yourselves facing this very human experience, one where after achieving great success, you all share in this common experience of melancholy, then what responds to this lingering sense of melancholy? This is the issue of living, friends. If we don't find it, then let's see what happens in the daily news. That people lacking what they need to live. I was always struck by a phrase I heard from a girl who later committed suicide in Rome. She said, "I have everything. I had everything. Even the superfluous is necessary." However, it is important to note that while these elements may be present, they do not constitute the core or fundamental aspects that are truly essential.
We talked about it in class because this story is complicated.
Because this is the question, but what is the indispensable that if not, it doesn't have it? It's not that she is missing something, as the mother thinks she is missing her daughter's sadness. It's not that she is missing something so indispensable that one cannot live without it. This is the greatness of man. And this is the challenge we are faced with in history, to find an adequate response to this greatness that we are.
Thank you. I believe that now there is an essential question from the audience. Otherwise, we are just working on stage and tiring ourselves out. Is there anyone who wants to ask a question?
For me, the one unique and indispensable thing is called Jesus. The issue is that in order to say it with true awareness of what happens, of what is meant by this word, it is necessary for someone to have had the experience of seeing this, of seeing it in action. What this word Jesus means, for us, it is already taken for granted. We think we already know it. And for this reason, many times I already know it. But it's like when one finds themselves with a loved one. They need to experience what that presence means to understand the significance that that person whom they perhaps knew has begun to have for us. As the Great Inquisitor, we might have the idea that we already know what it is, and that if it returns, it will ruin our celebration, when in reality, it is this. This is how it has happened to me in life. I wish for you that it can become an experience, not simply a word that is therefore a word already emptied of all the charm it has, and that Jesus had. Because when people, the other, saw, I always remember a comment from the gospel that everyone was amazed because they said, "We have never seen anything like this." What did they truly see in that man to be able to say, "We have never seen anything like this"? For us, certainly, indeed, we will not say it many times about Jesus, because for us, it is truly not an experience as it was for them. To be able to say we have never seen anything like this, it requires not simply a devoted memory of the past, something that is already old, but a present experience. If it is not a present experience, if Christianity is not an experience that one has in the present, where one finds themselves amazed at never having seen anything like this, Jesus can be perceived as an empty word. And this is the challenge. When you hear about Jesus like this, it arouses a curiosity to see what there is, so that one can say we have never seen anything like it.
Any other questions?
It is essential, I realize, in relation to what is being said, that the questions I have are absolutely a desire for something more. But why does this question become empty? Why do I not seek it? Why do we no longer seek it?
First, because it declines. As you see, it can decline within us, just as it sometimes did with the disciples. And so the issue is that we are in constant need to discover and experience His presence in such a fascinating way that the desire for Him is continually awakened in us, in our lives. Because we take this for granted, but it indeed happens in emotional experiences. Even the person who has fascinated you over time can become something not attractive enough because they decline. Man is so fragile that he declines if he is not faced with a presence that constantly awakens this desire to be invested with that presence. That's why I was surprised by a friend who, at a beautiful party where everyone was celebrating someone leaving for abroad, at a certain moment, she felt such a deep anguish that seeing the party with all the Christians made her think, but if at a certain moment all this beautiful experience does not indeed awaken in one the beloved desire, the desperate tension to say His name will not be enough for her. But perhaps many times we are indeed here, yet we do not feel this desperate tension as she sees to say His name. For this I say, but when one perceives that it is indispensable, think about when you fall in love, then a person feels indispensable because you miss them. How many here? Can we say today that they miss Jesus? They miss Him, meaning they feel nostalgia for Him, because to be able to live, to be able to look at themselves, to enjoy the celebration, to be with friends, even at the greatest celebration, but if He is not there, what is the celebration? So it is indispensable, because they perceive in you that it is indispensable. You are truly and deeply surprised by this nostalgic feeling, and this cannot be just because I know the word Jesus, because many are indeed present. In our time, they know the word Jesus. In history, they have repeated it, but how many miss Him? Some only live Christianity as an event, as a present experience, can feel this. It's like you can play a novel about love, a poem, but that doesn't mean you miss it. I remember once, just after I arrived here, I was invited to a dinner with a group of university students, and we sang a song, Lela, in which it said, I cannot live without you. And I asked the guys, but when you heard this phrase sung, Who did you think of? The vast majority, except for one, had not thought of anyone, because if they do not have a present experience, even the most beautiful song cannot evoke the nostalgia for the presence of a loved one. Only one person felt the nostalgia for love, and I felt the nostalgia for Jesus. If he is not present, he is not indispensable. We know we are talking about the same historical Jesus that the Gospels narrate, because we can say we have never seen anything like it. Or like the recent Gospel where the blind man hears Jesus speaking. Everyone was following Jesus as he was arriving at the village. He hears him speaking, jumps up and begins to shout, "Jesus, have mercy on me." The others wanted to silence him because deep down they were interested in the famous man. But he indeed has an urgency that not even when they silence him, he is silent, because he wants to take advantage of that opportunity. Perhaps such an opportunity would never present itself again. And then Jesus, as we saw earlier, with the girl, he heals, stops, and says, "What do you want? That I may see." But what I like most about the whole story is that it says, and then, having been healed, he followed him. He had encountered the indispensable, because not everyone who was healed followed him. For them, it was important to see. For others, it was important to walk. And for another, to solve the problem of his daughter. Or to the leper, to the 10 lepers whom he heals of leprosy. But of the 10 lepers, only one sees that he is indispensable for living, because many of us do not have leprosy. But Jesus is not indispensable. A question connected to another, a slightly longer question arises. Can man satisfy himself? That is it possible to fill?
That so-called unfillable void through man's independent experience. And so in this case, does he connect it, conceive another possibility of finding the indispensable? Or does he believe that Jesus is the only indispensable one to be able to fill this void?
You see, this is freedom, right? That he has left open to everyone. He did not come, right? He presented himself before everyone, right? Whoever follows me will have 100-fold here below. Even in the time of Jesus, there were the Pharisees, there were the Zealots, there were the Sadducees, there were different types of attempts at response. Then Christianity enters the Roman Empire, and just imagine the pantheon of gods. Now we are faced with a huge pantheon, many proposals. Who can answer this, my friend? Your experience, right? Only when you take all this unbridgeable emptiness seriously, are you aware of what you are seeking. Something that answers this unbridgeable emptiness. And this will be the criterion by which you judge anything, any image you have of the answer. Therefore, only Christianity is for the bold, meaning that one has the ability to perceive this chasm within and does not want to settle for less than this desire for fullness, and thus goes through life. This is the great adventure of living that we have ahead of us, because what do we have more desirable than to respond to this desire for happiness? Life is the space of time that we have at our disposal to freely intercept, not because someone imposes it on you, some inquisitor imposes it on you. Who responds to this emptiness? only for the bold, as you see, only for people like you who already asked themselves this question.
Thank you. Any other questions? It seems to me that we are a bit victims of a pattern when we talk about freedom and power. That is, freedom is mine and power is what others do to me. It seems to me that, in my opinion, culturally, we are all quite strongly determined to use this pattern. But the mess begins when I realize that this power is not just the power of the government over me, the power of my mother over me, the power of the teacher over me, but it's something that also intrudes upon my freedom, and that's where the chaos begins. How do you manage it?
If there is something that attracts you more than your narcissism, because the problem is that even this hypothesis that it is you who responds to this through your power, to your thirst for happiness, if even this is enough for you, because the narcissist is the one who seeks the answer within himself. Let's see if any power one exerts over oneself can fill the unfillable void. Here. This is crucial to understand, guys. Here, we have something that is within our human structure, which has launched us into this adventure with this detector inside, which can search for something outside or inside you, which can suffocate this. And you, deciding that it is you, must verify if this is capable of responding to this unfillable vow. Power can also be ours. But we must also verify ourselves. And this is what fascinated me the most, realizing this, that the judgment criterion I have within me does not even submit to me. That even judges my image and my attempts to respond to this insatiable void. So, it is so objective that it gives us no respite from any image we may have as a response.
It was said earlier that man was created rebellious. Freedom comes at a later moment, hypothesizing that in relation to the state of nature of rebellion, freedom is a more constructed state, a subsequent moment. And so even if it is a bit of a maximum system, I reiterate Dostoevsky's question, can rebels be happy?
I would almost say that only rebels can indeed be truly happy, because they do not settle for less than the genuine desire for happiness they have. Because one must not settle. One must truly be a rebel to not settle. But for me, true freedom is in fact this rebellion. Why? Because it is a rebellion that one does not accept to submit to anything else but to this desire for fullness that we have inside. But when you find someone free, they seem like a rebel. And there are very few that one truly marvels at their existence. Because the majority settle for less, right? Because what Dostoevsky says is indeed truly astonishing. That so many submitted to the Inquisitor, right? Because they prefer, right, the bread, they buy it, the Inquisitor buys the rebellion with bread. How many have rebelled in society throughout history, and how many have then submitted to the power of any place? The problem is, for someone who has self-awareness, power is too little. It is crumbs compared to the unfillable void. This is why it is a problem of self-awareness. We are, and why. We were made. This would be the challenge that we Christians have today, to show that there is a way to be in the world, that it is possible to be so free because only one is able to satisfy. And we do not need to lose this rebellion to not accept the crumbs of any power to be truly free. Free indeed.
I preface by saying that I do not have a particularly optimistic view of man, especially today. So, in your opinion, how could a man with all his difficulties, including in terms of awareness, etc., come to truly have this self-awareness and thus understand what is truly essential for himself?
He could reach this self-awareness by finding people and circumstances where he sees completely and fully realized what may seem unreachable and achievable to him in this pessimism you speak of. So the only thing that can truly challenge this pessimism of yours is to see real people today. Not in the past, not in literature, not just in imaginations, not just in films, where one sees something they have never seen before, something we mentioned earlier. This is what Jesus introduced. But not even when those who followed him, they saw hunger and desperation answered. At a certain point, Jesus had such a passion for those men that to avoid mocking them, he says, "Look, man does not live by bread alone." He could have settled. They had recognized it. Lo, lo, lo. They wanted to make him king, the gospel says. But Jesus tells them of his passion for the men before him. Look, bread will not truly satisfy you. And then he begins to raise the bar of the challenge for the bold like you, saying, unless you eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, you indeed have no life in you that you are seeking. Have you seen how many are left? 12? But even to those, Jesus did not spare the question, but you also want to leave me. He did not want submissive ones. He wanted them to stay, if they stayed, for the right reason, because they had discovered this. So, you find yourself in front of one like this. Right? But even those who have indeed seen him many times leave him and say, this is absolutely unbelievable. No. It is not possible. So Jesus did not even his closest ones, who could have seen him due to their association with him. Who was he? If he spared him, then Peter. Peter, be careful, who had asked, but that we have left everything and followed you to in the end, what will we have? He also wanted to get to the point. Some little places. The others arguing about who would be first. At a certain moment, Peter discovered something about that man. Do you also want to leave me? Only you have words that fill life, and meaningfully. For this reason, only those who have such an experience will be free. Because it is so essential for living that they can never go back to how it was before. That is what I wish for each of you. Thank you.
I allow myself a moment to lighten the mood because there is something truly essential, which is to have my students sit down again because they are breaking their backs every day. They have signaled me for a little while, so you can go sit down. It's not very comfortable here. Well, if there are no other questions, we will move towards the conclusion. I allow myself to say, because I have listened with great interest, that perhaps it is something we need to ask ourselves, is why we know very well what is necessary for us, what is superfluous for us, and instead we are left speechless and we have to think about it sometimes. We don't even know the answer when we ask ourselves what is essential for us. It seems to me that it is an open question that perhaps summarizes the essence of the entire discussion we had this morning. Before moving on to the acknowledgements, the last thing, you have many young people in front of you. What do you wish for them to be, free or rebellious?
Rebellious in the true sense of the term, who do not settle for less than everything their heart desires, because this is what will truly make them free.
And so let us thank Julián Carrón for this beautiful morning of reflection, very dialectical. Let us thank the FLA for wanting this initiative. Let us thank the Indodici company, Pietro Giovanni, the actors who have, thank you. We thank the schools that sent their students here, and especially thank you guys who have been amazing. Thank you. And see you next time.